even if we can't be together in person. Please be aware we are recording the service, and it will be posted on our Facebook and YouTube pages. We seek inspiration and meaning from a great many traditions and philosophies. We support each other's lifelong spiritual journey, and we encourage work for justice and peace. We value open minds and loving hearts. Here, may our minds stretch, our hearts open, and our spirits deepen. Please take a moment to think of all your friends at MVUUC. Greet them with a comment in the chat box, and remember that you can still reach out to them via email, phone, social media, or video chat. Physical distancing does not need to mean emotional distancing. Let us support one another. Visitors, as we are a diverse group with varying interests and beliefs, our services are varied in format, tone, and topic. We encourage you to view several services to gain a good understanding of our congregation. If you'd like to receive our weekly email newsletter, please email us at news, N-E-W-S, @mvuuc.org. MVUUC remains committed to supporting our members and friends during this difficult time of social distancing. For that reason, we are coordinating assistance with groceries, phone calls, and other needs. If this sounds like something that would be helpful to you, please send an email to sac@mvuuc.org with your name and what kind of assistance you would like to request. Now is the time for announcements. Announcements can be sent ahead of time to services@mvuuc.org to be read. If you have an important announcement now, you can raise your hand by clicking the Raise Hand button in the Reactions tab at the bottom right of the Zoom window. Then we will announce your name and turn on your mic and camera so you can make your announcement yourself. Lisa, are there any announcements today?
Yes, it looks like there is one from, I believe he goes by Matthew. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I am going to turn on your camera.
I'm still working with somebody on the presentation or a pitch for the Olympics opening ceremonies, closing ceremonies. She's working on a website to list the priorities and stuff. But I just wanted to say that I'm still reaching out to see anybody who'd be interested, different face and stuff. I don't know how she will integrate, if she will even use whoever comes, but anybody who is interested can reach out to me and I will pass on the information to her. She's still getting it all concrete, but it's an ongoing process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Are there any other announcements?
No, I believe those are all the announcements today.
Okay, then the chalice will be lit today by Tom Edge. Please join me in reading the words for the chalice lighting that appear as a comment in the chat box. We light this chalice to remind us of our highest aspirations and to inspire us to bring our gifts of love and service to the altar of humanity. May we know once again that we are not isolated beings, but connected in mystery and miracle to the universe, to this community, and to each other.
Our opening words today come from Ivan Crew. My wife and I discovered we were interspiritual early in our dating relationship, though neither of us knew there was a term to describe what was unfolding. As we talked about our religious study, spiritual practices, and insights that came out of both, we found, once we did a whole lot of explaining of vocabulary, that we believed many of the same things and had a very similar vision about what it takes to live a good life. We began to share our spiritual practices with one another and discuss our experiences. And through these practices and conversations, we each developed a true appreciation for the other's religion, while deepening our relationships with our own religions. We each experienced great spiritual nourishment in this process. It became obvious that we could each be devoted to our own different spiritual paths and simultaneously devoted to one another. We were married by a rabbi and a minister in a ceremony that joyfully reflected all of this. And now we have a 4-year-old son. Raising him within our interspiritual relationship means that we seek to raise him to also see the universal truths that form the core of his Jewish, Christian, and Buddhist heritages. We hope to raise him like a strong tree, firmly rooted in the sacred ground of our 3 traditions, but with branches that open to all religious and spiritual paths, so that he can find his own way toward truth and sacredness. I want my son to be gifted an interspiritual lens, because I believe it is a true lens. But I also hope he will cultivate this lens because it is what the world needs. These are challenging times. Distrust between people of different religions is running very high. I firmly believe that children who have grown up in a situation that supports them seeing how religious differences point to spiritual commonalities will be a unique position to help our world toward healing. One foot washing and tzedakah ritual at a time, one Easter Passover season at a time, one child at a time, this world can be healed.
Thanks, Tom. All right. So Unitarians, like us, we often like to claim Charles Darwin as one of us. His faith journey, though, was actually complex, and his beliefs changed over the course of his life through his education, his experiments, and through his relationship with his wife, Emma, which is the focus of my presentation today. To get some context, we first need to understand the religious makeup of the 19th century in England when Charles and Emma lived. For Emma and Charles' entire life, the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, was the dominant established religion in the country. The church was an integral part of British society. And I have a timeline here to situate what's on the right, which is related to the Darwins, with the context on the left here, that until the 1820s, there were legal barriers that prevented other Christians, like Catholics or Methodists, from enrolling in Oxford or Cambridge or from holding public office. Yet in the 1850s, only about 5 million people out of 18 million actually attended Church of England Sunday services. And around the same amount attended other Christian services. Non-Anglican Protestant dominations were growing, leading to the eventual end to requiring Anglican status for university attendance in 1871. Also, the Unitarian religion at the time was quite a bit different than what we think of today. So particularly, Unitarians believed that the Old Testament part of the Bible was true. including that God had created the world, humankind, and all plants and animals in their present day form. They also believed they were also different from many other Christians of the day. Unitarians did not believe that Jesus was a deity, and the word Unitarianism reflects the rejection of the Holy Trinity. In the 1800s, Unitarians believed in God, and generally in a good, benevolent God who had created heaven, and that humans had free will to do good or evil. In 1839, the Unitarian minister Henry Giles expressed a common, at the time, Unitarian belief, saying, "There is no room in the same universe for a good God and an eternal hell." So there's no room in the same universe for a good God and an eternal hell. And that sentiment stood in contrast to the Oxford Declaration, which was signed by 11,000 Church of England clergymen in 1864, stating that the punishment of the cursed, equally with the life of the righteous, is everlasting. In other words, there is a hell, and that's where you go if you're bad. So that the Unitarians kind of stood in contrast to that. So let's turn now to where Charles and Emma were during this time. Charles was born in 1809 and Emma was born in 1808, 9 months before him. They were both from respectable families in society. Charles' mother, who was Unitarian, died when he was 8 years old, but her views still had an influence on his religious upbringing, and that he started attending Unitarian day school around that time. Then later, as a teenager, after hating and leaving medical school, at age 18, Charles took up Anglican clerical studies to become a clergyman. And that included studying natural science, like geology and botany. And at that time, and up through his wedding to Emma, which would be at age 29, Charles believed that God could be seen in nature. His time on the HMS Beagle as a young man did not change his belief in God immediately. But even then, he believed that the earth was gradually changing over time, and that it must therefore be much older than the Bible's creation story in Genesis. Meanwhile, Emma, who was, like I said, a little less than a year older than Charles, she was finding her faith in God only further solidified during this time in her life. She was well-read, skilled in languages, needlework, horseback riding, basically everything she tried. And she had been brought up by Christian free thinkers. Her political views were moderate, progressive, and humanitarian. And something that really shaped her is that when Emma was 24 years old, she lost her dear sister Fanny, and she vowed to be religious so that she could see Fanny again in heaven. Emma believed that good Christians went to heaven and that non-believers went to hell. So when Emma wrote, "Her loss has left a blank which will never be filled up," she was expressing just how deeply hurt and impacted she was by the loss of her sister. And she was just very dedicated to making it into heaven so that she could be reunited with her sister. And this was just such a firm belief that really shaped her. Now they had known each other. Emma and Charles had known each other since they were children. And our story picks up with the conversations that they had in their 20s when Charles returned from his travels on the HMS Beagle. So by this point, Charles was in his late 20s, and he wasn't even sure that he wanted to get married. And he made this sort of a pros and cons list titled with 2 columns, marry and not marry. And this is the question in the middle. So since this is basically illegible, here's a sort of a transcription of what's on this page here. He included the freedom to go where he likes as being a pro, along with the benefits of having intellectual conversations with other gentlemen in society and in the clubs. But on the other hand, Charles enjoyed children and he wanted his own. And he wanted the mutual companionship through life that marriage would bring. So in the end, if you can see down here, he wrote QED on the Mary side, having proven to himself that it was the right choice. But Charles had one more big fear that was so big to him he couldn't even write it down: God. He went to his father for advice. So it didn't even make it onto this list, which he did eventually show Emma, his pros and cons list. But the issue of God and the idea of marrying a woman who believed in God was so big to him, he couldn't even put it into words. But he went to his father for advice on how he could marry a Christian woman with those uncertainties that he had. And his father advised him, conceal your doubts. So basically, don't confess this to Emma, but he did. So Charles was very open with Emma, and he did not conceal his doubts. He told her about his concerns. She was very surprised by his proposal, and he was just as surprised that she accepted it. They had not dated for very long, but they had known each other and each other's families their whole lives, and were both very excited to become engaged. And Emma didn't feel any regrets about getting engaged to Charles, but she was very worried about that big subject getting in the way of their happiness. So Charles had not concealed his doubts like his father had recommended, and he confessed all of this to Emma, that he was not a believer like her. And he shared that he was already thinking about what would become On the Origin of Species following the voyage of the Beagle. The fact that Charles had been so honest with her, even telling her, like, hey, my father said don't share any of this with you. The fact that he was so forthcoming and honest really gave her hope that they could reconcile any differences that they had. And she wrote to him, when I am with you, I think all melancholy thoughts keep out of my head. But since you are gone, some sad ones have forced themselves in. Of fear that our opinions on the most important subjects should differ widely. My reason tells me that honest and conscientious doubts cannot be a sin, but I feel it would be a painful void between us. I thank you from my heart for your openness with me, and I should dread the feeling that you were concealing your opinions from the fear of giving me pain. So she did believe that an honest doubt wouldn't be viewed by God as a sin, that as long as you were being conscientious and thinking through what does nature tell me, that wouldn't be viewed negatively by God. And really the most important thing to her was the honesty in their marriage, and that it gave her hope that they could work through this. But she was scared. And she also wrote to him, it is perhaps foolish of me to say this much, but my own dear Charlie, now we do belong to each other, and I cannot help being open with you. So Emma couldn't give up her belief in the afterlife, and because she had to hope that she would see her sister Fanny again. And she hoped that Charles could find a way to fully believe in God, even without believing in the creation story of Genesis. So she thought maybe there would be another path to heaven for Charles so that they could be together. And so Emma continued, will you do me a favor? Yes, I'm sure you will, she answered herself. It is to read our Savior's farewell discourse to his disciples, which begins at the end of the 13th chapter of John. It's so full of love to them and devotion and every beautiful feeling. It's the part of the New Testament I love best. This is a whim of mine. It would give me great pleasure, though I can hardly tell why. I don't wish you to give me your opinion about it. So if you aren't familiar with the 13th chapter of John, Jesus is washing his disciples' feet and teaching his commandment to his followers was to love your neighbors enough to wash their dirty feet. And so it was Emma's hope that if she shared Jesus' beautiful love that he taught with Charles, that would be enough for him to come to believe in Jesus too and go to heaven with her. So that even if the creation story wasn't literally true, that maybe the beauty in Jesus' love would be enough to make him Christian. Because Emma knew that Charles was a good man, and she couldn't bear the thought of them being separated for eternity. And according to her belief and what's in the book of John, cast into fire for eternity. And so, of course, Charles did read the passage, but he remained agnostic about the existence of God. But he had his own fears as well. He knew that his observations about the differences in animals that were separated by distance, so for example on different islands, that couldn't be compatible with the Bible, which said that animals were created by God at once and they never changed after that. So that's what Genesis says. And Charles experienced great anxiety over sharing his budding views on the modification by natural selection. So he had concerns about the reactions of society and concerns about bringing pain to Emma. His views were going to go against the established social structure, which was dependent upon God having ordained the royal hierarchy that everyone lived by. So that's part of the Church of England, that basically God is cool with there being a monarchy. So if there isn't a God, he is throwing everything in England into chaos. So it's a pretty big responsibility that he was weighing there. Emma and Charles went on into their marriage with these mutual concerns about their faith, but they loved each other too much already to do anything but marry. And they got married in 1839. So over the next decade, Charles wrote up his observations from his travels and his experiments, and he published some of them while raising a growing family with Emma, and regularly suffering from nervousness and stomach problems and fatigue from all of this anguish. Charles' poor health and Emma's many pregnancies, which were dangerous at the time, renewed her worries about the afterlife. Emma worried that Charles spent so much time with science and looking for there to be proof for anything before he believed in it, that he wouldn't pursue looking to Jesus for answers. And Charles anguished over Emma's fears. He was as in love as he could be, wanting to make her happy, yet he was committed to his theory of natural selection. And that left God out of creation. And he agonized over her request to consider Christianity until it made him quite literally sick to his stomach for much of his life. And Charles had kept a letter from Emma where she had expressed her fears, and he kept it forever. And he wrote in the margins of it, "When I am dead, know that many times I have kissed and cried over this." As parents, they were actually pretty ahead of their time with their progressive parenting, letting their children jump on the couch. They even had an indoor slide in their home. So Emma took the children to church. But she believed in Jesus in sort of almost like a Unitarian sense, actually, but disagreed with the church's proclamation about God being three in one, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And she would actually turn her back to the altar during the Trinity pair. So I love that about her, that she was like that brave and rebellious, and her children would follow her example and turn their backs to the altar. Charles, meanwhile, would spend his Sunday mornings going for walks while the rest of the family was praying in church. He didn't even attend with them. Their 43 years of married life were filled with love, but also marked with illness and tragedy. Their third baby, Mary Eleanor, died at 23 days old. Several years later, in the summer of 1850, the Darwins' second child, Annie, age 9, became listless and unlike her usual energetic self. She was a very happy, playful child, and Darwin actually privately wrote that she was his favorite. She developed a fever and a headache, and many doctor's visits and attempts to address her illness with medication couldn't save Annie, and she died the following April. The loss, this is something Charles knew, the loss of a child can ruin marriages. But Charles and Emma turned to each other. Charles wrote, "We have lost the joy of our household and the solace of our old age," knowing that the rest of their life would never have the same happiness without Anne. And following Anne's death, Emma especially held on to the hope of heaven. Emma found solace in prayer, and her faith strengthened like it did after her sister Fanny's death. But Charles was deeply shaken by this loss. And 8 years later, after the loss of their third child, pictured here, their youngest baby, Charles was certain he would never see those children again. So they did turn to each other, but they had different views on what it meant to lose someone to death. Shortly after this time, Charles, now this is like 20 years after he's been back and been married and had his ideas about the origin of species. But shortly after all of that, he sent his finished manuscript of On the Origin of Species to Emma. He was really nervous about the reaction of Victorian society, and that's her religious views and society's religious views had kept him from publishing this for 20 years. He was nervous about the reaction of Victorian society, but most of all, he was really interested in the feedback of his trusted partner. She was a member of a religious society who was going to give him honest feedback. Charles knew he was right. Like, he knew the theory of natural selection was right, but he wanted to present irrefutable evidence politely as a gentleman. And Emma's response to reading the manuscript was to implore Charles to stop thinking about faith the way he thought about science. She said, "It is feeling and not reasoning that drives one to prayer." Emma remained a believer and Charles remained agnostic. But over the years, later in their marriage, their differences became less important and they grew even more in their tolerance for those differences. Emma became less concerned about Charles' lack of faith, convincing herself that he would arrive in heaven for being a good man. And as for Charles, he told Emma that he could neither prove or disprove the existence of God. He wasn't looking to disprove God in his work by any means. In fact, he was looking for evidence of God in nature because that would have been the easier route if somehow God and natural selection could be compatible. In 1882, when Charles had multiple heart attacks, they had a lot of opportunities to talk and prepare themselves for the end of Charles' life. Something that in some ways Emma had really been preparing for since their engagement. On his deathbed, Charles said to Emma, "I am not the least afraid of death." And he said, "Remember what a good wife you have been to me." And Charles Darwin's deathbed words that he wasn't afraid to die, those have been misconstrued as evidence that he returned to Christianity. But his grown children refuted that, citing this sort of autobiography that he wrote for his children, confirming to them that he remained agnostic until the end of his life. And in that writing, Charles' children also found the words, "You all know your mother, and what a good mother she has ever been to all of you. She has been my greatest blessing, and I can declare that in my whole life, I have never heard her utter one word which I would rather have been unsaid. She has never failed in kindest sympathy towards me, and has borne with the utmost patience my frequent complaints of ill health and discomfort. I do not believe she has ever missed an opportunity of doing a kind action to anyone near her. I marvel at my good fortune that she, so infinitely my superior in every single moral quality, consented to be my wife. She has been my wise advisor and cheerful comforter throughout life, which without her would have been, during a very long period, a miserable one from ill health. She has earned the love and admiration of every soul near her. Emma died in 1896. I find Charles and Emma's love and devotion to be so inspirational for any interfaith couple today. Charles was actively looking for evidence to support the existence of God and couldn't find it. But he looked because of Emma. Emma supported Charles' publication of On the Origin of Species and The Descent of Man, even though she didn't agree with his views on God's role in the world. It pained her greatly to see him criticized by society and to witness his anxiety over the revolutionary nature of his work, just as much as it pained him that he was causing her to worry about separation after death. Their love, mutual respect, their open-mindedness, it's incredible to me. They loved each other so much that they both wanted to avoid conflict over this most important question, even though each found different truths when they drew upon their own personal experiences. That is the end of their story. And now we will hear a portion of a song called Cemetery by Say Anything.
Thank you so much, Colleen, not just for a great talk, but I think the most creative soundtrack we've had in a while for MVUC. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
This morning's UU Principal Connection was written by Sparrow F. Alden. Alden is a parent, religious educator, and co-owner/builder of a straw bale cabin in the New Hampshire woods. She is a lifelong UU and a member of the Church of the Larger Fellowship. She serves as Director of Religious Education of a Unitarian Universalist congregation in Vermont. The first principle of Unitarian Universalism affirms the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Interfaith families will find themselves welcome and supported, whether your interfaith paths are a struggle or a joy for your family. Children in Sunday school will learn through study of this principle that each person is a gift whom we treat with respect and kindness. The 18th century minister, Hosea Ballou, zealously studied scripture for clues about the nature of God and the concept of damnation. He found a God of infinite love and mercy, incapable of consigning souls to a position outside of grace. Ballou's uplifting and hopeful preaching about universal salvation was one of the cornerstones of early American Universalism. A UU congregation is a place to examine and let go of old images of damnation or exclusion of people from another faith tradition and any other ideas that are not constructive to your interfaith family. In UU Sunday services and informal gatherings, leaders and members strive to make their connections inclusive. Our third Unitarian Universalist principle affirms our acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth. The religious heritage and past experience of every person are honored in a Unitarian Universalist congregation as steps on each person's idiosyncratic path of lifelong spiritual development. We are working together to know one another and to celebrate one another's unique gifts and contributions to the congregation. Children in religious education will learn that this principle reminds us to learn about one another and celebrate the diversity of people who share the journey. Our fourth principle of Unitarian Universalism affirms a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Every thoughtful religious heritage carries truth and beauty, and we gratefully receive wisdom from them as we learn. We have no creed that each member is expected to believe and profess. Rather, the search is free. The search may therefore be much more difficult. A UU minister or congregation is not about to hand anyone a solution to the tough religious questions. We come together to support one another on our individual searches and to share our stories. A UU congregation is a place to cherish the wisdom, traditions, spirituality, and beauty of your own faith tradition or traditions, celebrating those facets that are true and right to you. We hope interfaith families find a hospitable setting in Unitarian Universalism to process their experiences, fears, and hopes, to acquire helpful family assistance with complicated interfaith issues, and to live faithfully, regardless of religious backgrounds. May our congregations be safe places to engage in personal reflections and interfaith discussions. May our congregations provide opportunities for spiritual growth and family explorations into interfaith issues and constructions of religious meaning. Our goal for every interfaith family is effective interfaith communications, leading to mutual insights and family dialogue, nurturing mutual respect. Now more than ever, we are counting on your pledge payments and donations to help sustain and strengthen this congregation that is so important to all of us, supporting our efforts to be a community of love, truth, justice, and service. Please click on the link in the chat box or scan the QR code and be sure to select the correct designation on the drop-down box when you donate. Thank you.
Sorry, everybody. For some reason, the music isn't playing the way it's supposed to be, so it's going to be a quiet offertory this time.
You can feel free to sing, Lisa.
Funny.
Shall we continue on from our silent interlude? Okay.
Quiet contemplation.
Yeah. Okay.
Now is the time for the sharing of joys, concerns, and milestones. Lisa, you can begin the recording again. Our closing words this morning come from Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. Let there be spaces in your togetherness, and let the winds of the heavens dance between you. Love one another, but make not a bond of love. Let it rather be a moving sea between the shores of your souls. Fill each other's cup, but drink not from one cup. Give one another of your bread, but eat not from the same loaf. Sing and dance together and be joyous, but let each one of you be alone, even as the strings of a lute are alone, though they quiver with the same music. Give your hearts, but not into each other's keeping. For only the hand of life can contain your hearts. And stand together, yet not too near together. For the pillars of the temple stand apart, and the oak tree and the cypress grow not in each other's shadows.
Please join me in reading the words for extinguishing our chalice that can be found in the comments in the chat box. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
After the closing song, you can turn on your videos and mics. We welcome you to stay in Zoom and chat with your fellow MVUUC members and friends for our coffee hour. And now, for our closing song, Ruth DeBrot will lead us in singing Spirit of Life. You can find the words as a comment in the Zoom chat box.